Now, for more on the president's China tariff threat, let's welcome former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon. Bannon is known as an architect of many of President Trump's America First policies. And Steve, one of the main things that you used to, in terms of being a presidential whisperer, was about China. And there are a few people around as I think hawkish as you on China, or as worried about the eventual way that the planet looks in 2025 or 2030 if China were to continue along its current path. Is anything surprising you about this latest development?
You know, I'd like to thank Becky for the introduction, Joe, but the reality is this is to the core of what Donald Trump believes and understands. He's been the architect of this from day one. And I think when you go back through the pattern of how this is developed, his consistency has been pretty remarkable. Not just what he said over many years, what he said on the campaign trail. You heard last night the response of working class and middle class people at his rally up in the Midwest. But if you look at from Mar-a-Lago all the way through yesterday, it's very consistent what the president's laid out of what has to happen. And I think it's pretty remarkable how the Chinese have tried to, the CCP, and this is what it's about, the senior leadership of the Chinese Communist Party, have tried to game the system once again, and they're used to American leaders, whether business leaders, finance leaders, or political leaders, buckling under this false, this false concept of engagement. Donald Trump has been very consistent. I think coming from Buenos Aires and Osaka, he looked at two basic things they could do and committed to. And this was purchases of agricultural products and the stopping of fentanyl, which is killing, 28,000 to 50,000 people a year. And they couldn't even do that. And I think yesterday was a very important day in American economic history, because on September 1st, we're going to cross a psychological barrier. Every good that comes to the United States from China is going to have a tariff on it. And I think that's yesterday was a very big day. I think President Trump's given the Chinese Communist Party enough time to respond to this fundamental restructuring of their economy that he's been working on. And they've got a leader now who's not going to back down. I think
you're on record saying that the most important thing a president, and in this case President Donald Trump, can do is to have this, for lack of a better term, confrontation with China. This is the most important thing in his, if it's one term, two term, or whatever, this is what he's going to be remembered for. And you say you're watching history unfold real time.
Yeah, I've been talking on this show to you guys, for the last 4, 5, 6 months from around the world, and I think it's been pretty straightforward. This is the defining event of our time, and the relationship between China and the United States is going to set, I think, the framework for how we go forward as a world economy for the next 25, 30, 40, 50 years. That's why this is history in real time. And I think what's quite remarkable is the foreign policy establishment, all the elites, all the geniuses that got us into this situation. Remember, we've deindustrialized this country because of this. This is Wall Street and the corporate leaders. This is the IR department of all these investment banks, Goldman Sachs, all the investment banks, and the giant corporations that got us into this situation, the American elite. This is the fundamental reason Donald Trump's president of the United States. This is the return of American greatness. This is bringing our manufacturing base back. It's not easy.
Steve,
but that's why I think he's unwavering in this.
Steve, speak to the political calculus here, because we've discussed sort of what it means that there's an election now coming up, and how the Chinese are viewing that election, how the Trump administration is viewing that election, the idea of fighting this fight throughout the election, what the tariffs ultimately mean to jobs in the United States. So if we actually do see a fall in jobs, does that actually impact the president? To the extent that you would be advising the president or thinking about all of these issues, how do you see it?
I think clearly the Chinese are hoping for a Democratic administration. I don't think there's any doubt. Even with, Jim Cramer brought up the concept of the economic patriotism of Elizabeth Warren the other day, her paper. But if you look at Biden, if you look at Harris, these are very weak on China. I think President Trump understands that the China situation is going to frame 2020, particularly because it's about bringing back our manufacturing base. One thing people miss, though, I think, is the concept that Xi, just because he's consolidated power after the 18th Party Congress, he's really voted on every day by the powers that be on all these factions in China. And he's now put hardliners in charge. Li He, the lead negotiator, the reformer, has essentially been layered. by their Commerce Secretary, Zhang, who's a hardliner. And I think that's why you've seen these negotiations crab sideways. But I think President Trump understands, not just for the immediate politics of 2020, but for the direction of the nation and the direction of free market capitalism and the industrial democracies for the next 10 or 20 years. And this is why the foreign policy elites who mock this guy don't get the fact that he understands deeply what the geostrategic struggle is and how important this is. And I think this is going to power him to 2020 because people see that this is what leadership is. This is what presidential leadership is.
Hey, Steve, just reading the tweet yesterday, I kind of was parsing it, trying to see if there was any room for maneuvering on it. And it seemed to me like he kind of laid out a path to put a halt on some of these tariffs before September 1st. And that would be if China went ahead and actually started buying some of the farm goods that he thought that President Xi had promised they would do. And if they did something about fentanyl, which I know goes all the way back to the G20 meeting. If they did those two things and the tariffs didn't materialize, how would you feel about that?
Well, Becky, I think this is what I get back to when we first came on. His signaling from Mar-a-Lago forward, he's always laid through a path of how we could come to some accommodation. Remember, he still calls President Xi his friend.
Yeah.
He's still accommodating. I think being very broad in the two key things that are in the world today, Hong Kong and Huawei, the President of the United States is trying to work with the Chinese. I 100% agree that he signals very strongly to the Chinese what you need to do to go forward. And they've reneged on many, many, many of the basic things here, particularly the thing, it was a sine qua non of this deal that the original tariffs would not come off. It was a sine qua non of this transaction that those 7 verticals, that the Chinese have been really at economic war with all the industrial democracies for 20 years, had to be addressed. State-owned industries, intellectual property, all that. The Chinese have reneged on this because they've had weak leadership in the West they had to confront. You're absolutely correct. Yesterday, I think he did signal to the Chinese once again, hey, you committed to this in Osaka. Here's what you need to do. And if you don't do it on September 1st, we're going to pass a psychological barrier. Everything that you send to the United States is going to have a tariff on it. He reinforced that last night. You saw the response of American citizens and American patriots up in the Midwest. So I think this thing, to me, gets more serious and more focused every day.
How did Hong Kong play into this, Steve? If I were President Xi, I'd be kind of looking here, I'd be kind of looking there, and I'd be wondering how many things I want to be juggling at once. I think I don't want something like unfortunate to happen, obviously, and it's concerning to watch, but that seems like it's helping Trump as well in this, because if that cat gets out of the bag in a big way, I don't know how that ends.
The world's media, which is, the Party of Davos cheerleading squad, it says all this great stuff about Xi and being a global leader. Look at Hong Kong. To me, Hong Kong's inextricably linked to their leadership. You start your show by talking about New York City being the world's financial capital. That's correct. The other two important capitals are the city of London and Hong Kong. And particularly Hong Kong, it shows you what English common law and the Chinese people can do when they're united. And the people, these young patriots in Hong Kong, are fighting for free market capitalism. And President Xi, I happen to believe, I believe that you're going to see these patriots, these young Chinese, these millennials who are fighting for capitalism being tear gassed, having bullets shot at them, having riot police come in and beat them. I happen to believe that they're going to stand. I don't think they're going to break. They understand what the future is. They understand how important it is to have the rule of law, and they're prepared to sacrifice themselves. And I got to tell you, I think this weekend, if the Chinese Communist Party declares martial law in Hong Kong, there's going to be some problems. And once again, I think this shows the statesmanship of President Trump. He is trying to work with the CCP that has clearly mishandled this situation. He's trying to work with President Xi. What President Xi, I think, has made consistent missteps, misreading of the strength of President Trump and the Western democracies pulling together. And I think President Xi has got to start paying attention to the signaling that President Trump has given him to get out of this situation, because I got to tell you, I don't think the world's prepared to have another Tiananmen Square. I think the world has changed in the last 30 years, and I got to tell you, if they declare martial law on Sunday, which it looks like we could be heading towards that path, and I don't think these young Chinese people are going to back down, I don't think the world's prepared to allow the Chinese Communist Party to have another Tiananmen Square against these young people.
don't know how much you saw of the debates, but I'm sure you read about them at least. Do you think that Biden is the front runner, or I don't know. I think that maybe Kamala Harris. I've heard people say she's in the pole position right now. What's your view on that?
Well, first off, I don't think Joe Biden. Look, on the polling and whatever this polling is, I just don't see if the Democratic Party want to take on Donald Trump. I got news flash for them. They're not going to take on Donald Trump with Joe Biden. He's not going to be able to stand up to the withering assault that Donald Trump. You've got to bring it. You've got to know how to hit a fastball. And Joe Biden's days of hitting a fastball are many years in back of him. And I also think it shows you right now with these. I did get a chance to see these, although I'm down on the border. You just don't see people take. I think it's still a pillow fight. And I think Kamala Harris and the leadership of the Democratic Party are not addressing the central issues in the world today. And I think they're very weak on China. Biden's atrocious on China. Biden's financial relationships, his family's relationships with China, he's soft on China. Kamala Harris soft on China. So I think that this is the key geostrategic. To be commander in chief, you have to have a defined point of view, and you've got to let the American people know what that is. So I think these debates, I consider it a summer replacement show that's not going to get picked up for the fall. I think the ratings are down. There's no energy. I don't see any excitement in these candidates. So, you still got some people on the sideline. Right. I think this Democratic primary and the makeup of this thing is you've got Bloomberg, you've got Clinton, you've got some pretty savvy people on the sidelines, I think, watching this. And right now,
and you think
the Democratic Party think they're going to beat... I think the Democratic Party wants to take out. If they want to take out Donald Trump, I don't see anybody on the stages either night.
You see Michael
Bloomberg close to taking out Donald Trump.
But you see Michael Bloomberg or Hillary Clinton jumping into this?
I think that people are going to step back and watch this and look into the fall of this year and see if any of these candidates really come up and step up to the plate and can take on Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not only I think a great leader as a president. He's an amazing campaigner. And I think the Democratic Party's number one objective is to defeat Donald Trump. I don't see it on those stages. Maybe it emerges. It hasn't emerged yet. But by this fall, if it has not emerged that one of these candidates can take them on, you have people like Bloomberg, you have people like Clinton, you have people on the sidelines. I know people may mock and ridicule that today, but this whole thing in the Democratic primary about who's going to actually take on and defeat Donald Trump, which is their number one priority, that has not emerged yet.
I don't think, as far as our words go, Steve, I didn't hear Russia on either night of the debates, but I heard racist a lot. And I've also heard that there are suburban people that I'm not going to get gender specific, but there are concerns that the tweets or the divisiveness or the being so confrontational can turn off voters that Trump would need, and that someone like a Bernie Sanders or someone like that could eventually be elected. You think that is a real possibility or no?
No, I don't think it's a real possibility. I think people also, remember, one of the things the American people, you have to give them permission to vote for someone who's commander-in-chief. Bernie Sanders is not going to be commander-in-chief of the United States of America, right? I just don't think that's going to happen. I think there are other candidates up there that could be if they could step forward, but I don't think you see it right now. No, I think, look, I think in the President Trump's, the logic of it is it goes back to the 2016 campaign. What the hell do you have to lose? I think he's really, remember, working class African Americans and working class Hispanics are a part of trying to pull together this Trump constituency. That I say if you bring in working class African Americans and working class Hispanics, you can put together a governing majority for 40 or 50 years here. That is, to me, the driving momentum of the Trump movement. That's about all this low unemployment and wages starting to rise. This is the key. This is the key of why he's fighting. This is the key. If you really poll Hispanics, they understand that a lot of these manufacturing jobs that have gone to China, they would be filling if the jobs are back here in the United States. This is what I think President Trump is confronting something we've avoided having a real conversation on.
But then how do you explain these, what might be described have been described as racist or retrograde comments about places like Baltimore and other places like that clearly have an impact on the national discourse?
They do, but look, my mom comes from Baltimore. We're very close. I was a Colts fan as a kid growing up. You look at these inner cities, and that's, I think, the point of President Trump on both his immigration policy to stop this constant competition by unskilled labor, and really to focus on a meritocracy for immigration, for regular immigration. It's trying to go into Baltimore, into Detroit, into St. Louis, and have a renaissance and say, it's the whole reason what we argued about getting troops and this drawdown in Afghanistan. Take that capital and put it to your inner cities. I think President Trump's got a pretty well thought through plan here. And I tell you, he's not going to back down. We're going to have this conversation. I think it's going to go beyond this thing of throwing up that he's a racist. And let's get down to the fact of why Baltimore's in the shape it's in. Why is Detroit in the shape it's in? Why is St. Louis? Why is St. Louis in the shape it's in?
Retrograde. You can
well, I got to tell
alphabet.
you.
Yes. Hey, Steve, we got
Listen,
2 minutes left.
He's got a different house style, but you know what?
Yep.
He's trying to drive home the point. We have to have a real conversation about this.
You have owned Bitcoin for how long? Is it 3 years, or how far back does it go? And were you buying down when it got down to 4,000 or 5,000? Bitcoin Bannon?
I would like to say I had enough foresight, enough courage to buy as it went all the way down. No, but I think cryptocurrencies have a big future. I really do. I think there could be a very important part going forward, particularly in this global populist revolt.
And the Fed's making it a little easier, maybe to make that sale to people about non-fiat assets, I guess, wouldn't you say? Or not the Fed.
Well, listen, I think the Fed's policy has been terrible up until here recently. You know, this thing has been one of the reasons I think for the economic numbers. And hopefully the Federal Reserve chairman understands about this overvalued dollar. But look, I also think that the fear mongers about what President Trump's doing on the tariff side fail to understand that the Chinese have been cutting prices and they've been devaluing the currency. You know, they've been doing currency manipulation. I think since the first tariffs went in February of 18, they've cut 10%. I think the psychological barrier of 100% of tariffs on everything is September 1st. Also, the psychological barrier of 7, as you know, the exchange rate. I think they're going to blow. I believe they're going to blow through that psychological barrier, and it's going to be a new day.
Hey, Steve, on the crypto front, what did you make of the G7 and the whole sort of regulatory scheme sort of have a freak out when Facebook announced its Libra plan? And what do you think that means to regulation longer term over things like Bitcoin?
Look, I think the central banks and all the central banks and actually the banking communities want to regulate. They want to get in and regulate crypto. They don't want. They want to still stick to fiat currency. I happen to think that Facebook was principally against some of the Chinese Alibaba, Tencent, et cetera, these payment systems. I think that what people have to confront now and people are start looking at is how the Chinese in third world countries in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, and I think potentially in Latin America, are starting to put these payment systems in that are going to kind of try to give them global dominance and be able to get off the reserve currency of the dollar. That's really what I think is got to be looked at.
Okay. Steve Bannon from the border in Oracle, Arizona. Thanks for touching on all these different subjects. We'll see you again hopefully soon. Thanks.